Good morning. I'm delighted to share the stage with Cynthia today from Fidelity. I think today is truly a melding of worlds. I represent the DeFi side, and Cynthia more so the traditional finance. But before we get into it, maybe a quick introduction from you and what you do at Fidelity.
Sure, this is great. Thrilled to be here today and actually amazed at the amount of energy there is in the room. We at Fidelity have been working in the blockchain and digital asset space. We say this for probably over 10 years now. We started doing early research in the blockchain space back in the 2014-2015 timeframe, and that early research ultimately led to the launch of our custody business, which was several years after that. And the digital asset management business, which sits in the asset management side of Fidelity, we launched formally within asset management about 2.5 years ago. And the intention of what we're looking to build is very much, I think, in line with this conversation today, and why it is that we've had conversations with quite a few builders in this space, in the DeFi space, as we are looking at ways to be able to bring not just digital assets and digital asset exposures to our investors, but also being able to leverage on-chain capital markets. And I think we heard the phrase internet-based capital markets earlier today. We think that there are so many opportunities to be able to conduct financial activities on-chain that would ultimately lead to more assets being tradable across the portfolios that we manage for our clients, and engaging in financial applications on-chain to generate yield in new ways, and finding those new sources for yield is also incredibly interesting as we think about how it is that we are constructing financial solutions. So really excited about this conversation today as well.
Fantastic. I want to set the scene. Crypto today, obviously after BTC's all-time high, sits at approximately 3.5 trillion, but TradFi is closer to 40. And obviously this is an imbalance. These pots are not the same.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start by setting the scene for even something like settlement. On Solana, I'm expecting settlement to be under a second. When Coinbase takes 30 minutes to deposit my Solana, I get really cranky. But then when I speak to traditional allocators, that's very different. I mean, even 1985, the settlement time was T plus 5 days. Whereas if you put a trade in on Monday, you would fill it the following Monday, which is insane to all of us here, but was very much the norm.
Yeah, it is incredible. If you go back and your point about in 1975, the standard settlement time frame from the moment in which you executed your transaction to the point at which you paid for your transaction and it cleared was 5 days. And today, as of last spring, our markets have now in the US moved to a T+1 settlement cycle. And that is over the course of 50 years, we've been able to compress that settlement cycle. What I think this actually says, though, is about the ability for traditional financial markets to be able to leverage technology, and leverage technology in ways that will help to improve the efficiency by which we're able to move capital and to settle transactions, the way in which we are going to be able to construct portfolios and be able to manage personalized investment portfolios at scale. All of this is enabled by technology. And so when we see that moving assets on-chain is going to continue that progression of improving the efficiency and allocating capital and being able to create new product structures that allow us to pool capital and create more personalized investment experiences, this is the innovation that continues to take place throughout asset management and throughout capital markets. And so, as we continue to think internally about what blockchain-based capital markets might mean for the future of financial services, this is a conversation that is taking place across many asset managers, banks, and broker-dealers. And I think now with the regulatory environment here in the US, specifically addressing this potential for innovation and now wanting to nurture that, this is an amazing time to be having conversations. And so I think a little bit of what we talked a lot about was how do we have these conversations where we can bring traditional financial institutions into the on-chain capital markets, and what do we need to do in on-chain capital markets to bring more institutional engagement and participation?
So it sounds like three key things to distill. One is speed, the second is cost, and obviously the costs go down. But I think the most important thing is the reduction of counterparty risk when things are faster, going from T+5 to T+1 days, but then to everything on-chain, which is T+1 second maybe. What does that look like for you when you think about moving assets on-chain? Because I do think there's more functionality that you see on-chain that you otherwise wouldn't get. So there's this world of what I think is financial transformation that can take place.
I think one of the things that is important to keep in mind about this technology is it provides great flexibility and optionality. So just because you can settle a transaction in T+1 second or T plus 5 minutes or whatever the block time is, there's a diversity of transactions and asset types across our capital markets. And it isn't necessary that we need to move everything at the same exact speed. I think that's also something that has been helpful as we continue to think about market integrity and counterparty risk, is calibrating the technology and the ability to move capital alongside of what are we trying to achieve? Fast and velocity is good for payments because those are instantaneous in terms of being able to settle that particular transaction. For some of these other asset movements, moving more of the processes that historically have been a big part of the impediment and why it takes so long to settle certain transactions, improving that efficiency in processing is going to be tremendously beneficial. Is it going to get us to immediate settlement for every asset type? Perhaps someday that will work, but I do think that this is also going to be incremental as we are bringing more assets on chain and wanting to ensure that at the same time that we are going to benefit from the efficiency, we're also going to continue to maintain market integrity.
So on market integrity, this is like a fantastic segue onto trust, which I think underpins a lot of our financial system today, to DeFi, which is very trustless at times. Yeah. And with trustlessness, it's not free. It comes with over-collateralization. So how do you think about that? Because whilst you have a trustless element, it's somewhat inefficient.
There is, I think, a lot to unpack in how it is that capital markets work today. It is very much based on trust. In order to engage in a transaction and in order to be able to transfer an asset from one holder to another, there's a set of terms. It is a contract that is effectively being created and executed in order to transfer that asset. And in the way in which this technology will facilitate trustless transactions is you now understand and you've seen in the code what the terms of that transaction are, and that is what you know as you are engaging in that transaction. And so hence, you know what the terms are, you know what the price and the conditions are. You can see that being done instantaneously. DeFi markets have both the over-collateralized type as well as the under-collateralized type. The over-collateralized type is where you are posting more collateral than the value of the transaction, and that is a way to facilitate trust. And then I think that is what you were getting at, where there is an inefficiency of capital. If in order for you to be able to engage in a permissionless transaction and to be able to rely on the counterparty being able to settle that transaction instantaneously, you need to post additional collateral in order to demonstrate that trust. Is there a way to get to a point where you can see more efficiency in the way that transactions can work in the DeFi ecosystem without having pre-funding or overfunding of your collateral positions?
So when we get to building trust, if obviously a bank on the other side or Fidelity is my counterparty, I feel a lot better than a pseudonymous address on the web.
Yeah.
But when we think about even identity standards, KYC standards, for instance,
Yep.
That's very, very tricky because by nature, the ethos of crypto to date is trustless, you don't need it. But as we come almost full circle, we see more institutional engagement. It almost feels like there is either a hybrid or some type of standard that has to exist. Maybe not in a walled garden environment, but within perhaps layer wallet infrastructure.
Yeah. You're asking some really interesting questions about how we can bring more registered assets, registered securities into the on-chain financial markets. And what we think is incredibly exciting about the continuing development in this technology is the ability to find a way to automate the verification of your counterparty such that you can transfer that registered security to a verified counterparty in an automated way that is secure and is not going to require that you are sending your individualized personal information across every single transaction. And so how do you build a more automated system where we can see identity tokens that have the ability to demonstrate the provenance of the owner of that asset and that wallet address, and to allow for a more trustless way to be able to automatically affect that transaction. And that is where we're not quite there yet, but we are very encouraged by being able to see not just the technology, but global regulators becoming more aware of these assets being cross-border and now wanting to find ways to be able to allow for the effect of cross-border transactions.
Absolutely, and as Solana embraces this internet capital markets thesis, a lot of it's going to come down to asset issuance, issuing new assets on chain, doing IPOs on chain even, as we heard from earlier today. Is that a reality that's going to come around, or will it take a lot longer?
For assets to
do asset issuance, IPOs on chain, away from what we've been used to for the history of how public offerings have been historically done.
Yeah. I think the idea of native issuance of tokens on chain is not as far off as we might think it might be. I think that is a reality. I think where we've seen guidance come out from the SEC in just the last week, recognizing the ability for transfer agents to be able to maintain records on chain, that is tremendous in being able to move us forward and being able to leverage new structures for capital formation on chain, which then will lead to more efficient native issuance on chain. The clarity coming from the regulatory environment is also going to help the institutional participants to build that infrastructure necessary to be able to bring those assets into their back offices and be able to process those assets, digital assets, and the traditional assets side by side. I think that is part of the next phase of this integration as we move more and more assets and transactions on chain.
Absolutely. And the final thing I want to end on, and I want this to be a relevant takeaway for everyone in the audience. I mean, selfishly as a builder, I've also struggled to speak with institutions, and sometimes it's too far up in the air, too far abstracted, sometimes it's too low in the weeds. What is the best way for these two different worlds to just get better at communicating with one another? Yeah.
That's such an amazing place to start from the question of how do we bring the two worlds, traditional financial institutions and DeFi founders together. I think ultimately we have a shared vision and a shared goal in wanting to see improved and broader access and availability of capital and of assets and financial services to more users. And how do we then have the conversations around what are not just the benefits of what a what a user will be able to get on chain, but how do we adapt to what the financial institutions are also very mindful of from a governance and a regulatory standpoint? And I think having that as alongside of all of the benefits is a great place to start.
I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, and I think as we start to slowly migrate that 40 trillion assets over to what is our very fast-growing pie that can't be ignored, I think there's a lot that needs to happen, and I think conversations like this really kickstart that. So, Cynthia, thank you so much for taking the time, joining me on stage, and sharing your insights with everyone in the audience today.
Thank you so much.